You ever feel like you're your own worst enemy when it comes to productivity? Like, you just can't seem to get out of your own way? Well, there's actually a little something to that. Penny Zenker is a productivity expert and is the best-selling author of The Productivity Zone. Her passion lies in utilizing human psychology and behavior studies to help people live life with more focus, less stress, and better communication. Now, who couldn't use that? She teaches something called the 10 cores of productivity, and I hope you're paying close attention to all three parts of this interview because Penny just might reveal to you exactly that nugget of knowledge that you need to become a peak performer.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Penny, thank you so much for joining us today. I know the audience is going to get so much out of today's discussion. You know, I want to dive in right off the bat. You sent in some interesting facts. The first one was you sold your IT company to a publicly traded French company. You used to race tandem mountain bikes, and your childhood dream was to be a comedian until you moved to Switzerland. So I'm expecting you to be very funny today. You need to hold up.
Uh-oh. No pressure.
All right, no pressure. Just a little pre-frame there. I need you to be funny. Now, this tandem mountain biking, you know, I'm a motocross rider, so I'm cool with all the adventure stuff. But tandem on a mountain bike? That sounds crazy.
It is a little bit. It's really fun. I hadn't thought of it until I met this guy who, you know, you think that your Prince Charming is coming on a white horse. Well, mine came on, a tandem. And so hopped on the back and we started to race with it. And it's super fun because everybody underestimates you. They're like, oh, you know, that machine's not going to really be, you know, they'll be way behind. And then we zoom past everybody, especially on the downhills, right? Because we have the weight advantage. And yeah, it's just fun. And that's how I got into it is because he was a tandem. He worked the front and I was the stoker in the back.
There you go. The things we'll do for love.
Yeah.
Now,
it takes a lot of trust to be on the stoker in the back.
Yes. It's kind of like those team building things where the person falls backwards and everybody catches them.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the IT company. And what I want to dig into just real quickly is, and I want to jump into your productivity expertise. What were some of the lessons that you learned in selling your company to a publicly traded company? And what would you do differently? What could you do better? Because many people listening to this podcast have businesses and eventually want to sell them, and the public sector is a viable buyer.
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing I would recommend for people is to think now about whether you have a lifestyle business or you want to sell the business. Because the way that you structure it, you know, they go through a pretty hefty due diligence process. So you have to have your processes pretty well defined. You have to be very organized in the way that you do things. So the smaller your company is, the better you have a chance to get it organized and lay out the processes from the very beginning. So one of the things that I learned was just how to luckily I had done that because I came from a big company environment. So and I wanted to scale my business. And so when you want to scale, you have to create processes, and that's the best way to optimize them. So, but I definitely learned a lot about the due diligence process that they go through, and you know what you need to have in place to make that go smoothly.
You know, it amazes me how many entrepreneurs and business owners treat their business like their own personal bank account.
It's dangerous.
It really is. They're not even doing payroll for themselves. They think that the money in the bank is theirs. And I see it all the time, and pretty sizable businesses sometimes. It just shocks me. So I think that's great advice. From the very beginning, set it up like you're going to sell it to someone that really knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. And that means process. As you said, that means, first of all, who wants to be in business and not pay themselves a salary? Had I not had that set up, and I paid myself a very nice salary because I was the one bringing in all the business. And, then that salary just moved over, and that's what they started to pay me for the 2 years that I was linked in for transition. So otherwise, you could be shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I think some people take a short-term view and go, well, I'm just going to take this out as a dividend so I don't have to pay, any of the additional taxes. Short-term thinking.
Short-term
and dangerous
thinking. Exactly.
and potentially illegal.
Exactly.
Don't want to get audited. Well, let's dive into. I'm really excited about this interview, by the way, because what we do here on Peak Performers is all about productivity and execution. I mean, that's our entire brand. So to get an expert on about productivity, I've been looking forward to this. I'm going to be taking notes myself. So if you're driving, pull over and grab a pad, because I know the value of today's episode is going to be massive. I want to start with productivity. You mentioned in one of the videos that I saw of you, you interview people on your podcast and ask them, what does productivity mean? Define it for us.
Well, I think the first thing that's important to note is in the 2 years that I've been doing that podcast, I haven't had a single person give me the same answer.
Interesting.
Right? That just tells me that we have so many words that are chunked up so high that when we talk about them, we're often meaning different things. So if you have an organization and you're talking about productivity, time management, sales, whatever these high chunk words, unless you really clearly define them as a group and have a common language and a common understanding of what they are, you might be working towards different goals.
Absolutely.
So I define it in my book, and so that people can follow the language that I created, is where efficient and effective meet. Because we're kind of, when we're in what I call the productivity zone, we're both efficient and effective. And if we're only efficient but not effective, or we're effective but not efficient, then we're really not in the zone and we're not reaching that level of productivity.
Brilliant. It's going to be really interesting because you and I, we haven't had a chance to talk before, and I've just started to look at some of your material, but it's really going to be interesting because so much of our stuff is so aligned.
It's scarily similar.
It really is. I'm always talking about efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, you've got to have both. And that's brilliant. It's funny. You talk about communication. I just want to add something in here. Whenever you're working with your team, or anybody for that matter, it's so easy for you to get off track simply because you don't have the same definition as the other person. I'm doing an online course with my team, and we're talking about classes and courses and modules, and each one of us had a different definition. So I'm saying we got to get this module correct, and they're like, we just did that. I was like, no, we didn't. So they're like, yes, we did. I'm like, what's a module to you? And they're like, oh, we're on different pages. So
right, And what's interesting is that's, if you think about when you're ready to solve a problem in the organization, isn't that the same thing? Everybody sees the problem a little bit differently. So when you get together, you need to commonly define, how do we understand what is the problem exactly? And then, work towards a solution. So I think it's so simple yet so important that everybody's on the same page about anything that you're talking about.
Yeah, no question. We both have a person in common, Keith Cunningham, and he's always big as saying, solve the problem that is. Make sure you understand and define the real problem. Right.
And usually the presenting problem is not the problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah, most times it's just a symptom. You don't even know that's not the root problem. Let's dive into productivity. I know you've got an assessment, you have a course, and you talk about the 10 cores of productivity.
Yeah, I believe, out of all the people that I've worked with all over the world, regardless of culture or industry, I found that there are really 10 core factors that drive people's productivity. And I kind of broke it up because 10 is a bigger number for some people, and we want to take things into smaller chunks. So I break it up into 3 categories to understand what is the psychology piece of it, which absolutely has to come first. Then what are the strategy pieces? And then what makes it sustainable. So those core drivers of our productivity are really broken out into those 3 groups.
And what are those?
So if we look at the psychology, I also call it, this is how we manage our energy. So these 4 components will help us to get in a productive state. So it's motivation or purpose is the first one. The second one is self-talk or language. And I interchangeably use those words because some people don't understand if I speak of language, I'm so into language and the words that we use and the energy they have. But many people would better understand self-talk and what we say to ourselves and what we say to others. So kind of broke it out like that. Then number 3 is focus. It's understanding, what's distracting us and staying focused at what I believe is 3 levels of focus. And then the 4th item is our self-care and our physiology, right? Any of those can shift our state so that we can be more productive with the time that we have. So when we talk about any of those things and how we manage our energy, that we can, I like to explain it, everybody's had those days where you feel like, you got so much done and you feel like you got more done today than you did in the last 2 weeks, right? Have you ever had one of those days?
Absolutely.
Right. And then we also have those days where you get to the end of the day and you feel like, oh, it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts and you're not really sure what happened.
Been there.
You've been there, right? And so, each of those days contains the same number of hours. So the real difference is how we showed up for the time that we had. And so that's why these energy aspects, these 4 areas, are really key that we work on those first.
And what are the 3 levels of the focus?
So in a high level, it actually integrates those different areas that I just spoke of at the energy management. So it's strategic focus, which talks about our purpose and our motivation, right? What are our goals, and understanding clearly where it is we're headed. And then it's our mental focus, which is usually the biggest thing that throws us off, right? Is, focusing on what we don't want versus what we really do want, and how we can self-sabotage ourselves at that mental level. And then there's our attention to focus. What is the next step? What's the process that we need to be doing in the moment in order to make the most of that time? So it's really aligning the 3 of those areas to create what I call then laser focus.
Interesting. Now I'm sketching this out on a piece of paper. So those are 3. Are those 3 of the 10? Did I get that right?
Those are 4. We talked about those 4
Okay.
are how we manage our energy. So motivation, self-talk, focus, and self-care.
Got it. Okay. Move us into the other core principles. Oh, you call them core drivers. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I call them, they could also be called fundamentals.
Okay.
Right. I call them drivers because, you mentioned Keith Cunningham. So he talks about lead and lag indicators. And very often what we tend to do is we focus on lag indicators. And that means those are things that we've already done, and then we see the result. So when I get on the scale, I see my weight. Well, it's not a lead indicator. It's a lag indicator. I see what I weigh, and it's what I weigh now. I can't change it. So a lead indicator, and that's why I call these drivers, are then things that you can tweak to change that result. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I speak about lag and leading indicators all the time. It's really about doing the things that you can affect and take action on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we're like, brother and sister from another mister.
Yeah, we could teach together. But I like your stuff.
We should talk about that. So
there are so many principles, but I think I love the way that you put your piece on it, your spin on it. The stuff that I've looked at so far, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. You're doing a phenomenal job. And I think this is where so many entrepreneurs and business people fall down. They're always trying to come up with that great new strategy. It's like all about strategy. Well, it's about the productivity. You got to be able to get it done. And what's preventing it? So please continue.
A lot of people spend way too much time on strategy and don't get anything done, right? So it's all the planning. It's got to be that mix.
Yep.
Okay, so winning strategy. So what is part of that? That's, and this is at different levels. It's at the strategy planning level, but it's also at the operational level. So we have planning, right? We need to plan out long-term what our vision, what our goal, and so forth, what our milestones are. So it goes from long-term to short-term planning. Then we have process, because when we want to create leverage and we want to scale our business or optimize anything that we're doing, we need to know not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it. And then once we have it written out and clear, we can communicate it better, and then we can also optimize it. So that's planning and process. And the last one is priority. It's understanding that it's that whole urgency versus importance thing that Stephen Covey talked about with the Eisenhower matrix, is that we need to have a certain amount of time that we clearly schedule and focus on the priorities that are important, grow our business, to create better health, to improve our relationships, because we all know that if you don't make sure that you make those things a priority and get them scheduled, then they don't happen. We live in a society today, I believe, that everything is urgent, right? We've created this with instant text messaging, and, we always need to be available. And so we've created this sort of impulsive urgency, which keeps us more reactive than proactive. And so really being able to identify what those priorities are and stick to them is so important.
What do you advise your clients to do in order to move more things into the important but not urgent quadrant?
Become aware. Most people aren't even aware of what they do. So, one of the things is I have a program that I call the 7 Steps to Mastering Time Blocking. And the first step is just understanding what your goals are. And the second step is where we identify what drives those goals. So we need to find out what those lead indicators are and those lead areas. So to be able to move from, reactive and the busy work is to really understand, where you're spending your time now. So do an analysis and see where you're spending your time and where you need to be spending your time in order to achieve your goals. And then assess the gap. Usually you can take a look at what's distracting you, track your distractions, and then start to eliminate them. Start to automate. That goes back to the process point. Start to look at what processes you can automate or delegate, and look to delegate, effectively, not just sort of, a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, they need to have that control, right? The business is theirs, it's growing, it's not yet big enough for them to have to let go of everything. So they kill themselves and sort of micromanage on that aspect. So it's really delegating effectively in that context. Some of those things really basic, but that's how you can clearly get some of those busy work things that you're doing is to become aware of what you're doing, track it, and then take a look. I found, interesting enough, I had one client that I was working with who he brought in, I think it was around $500 million to his company. It was obviously the rainmaker. And he was head of his division, and he felt like he had more potential. So we went and we looked at where was he spending his time currently, and where was there potential? What was the gap of what he could hand off and delegate to someone else? And of course, the area was very sensitive. He was working 70% of his time on creating proposals, which on the onset you'd say, okay, well, that makes sense. But when we dug deeper, I said, are there parts of the proposal that someone else could do? And you could focus on the more complex areas. And when we had him value what his time was worth, like it was like this big aha when he saw what he was doing, what tasks, could possibly be delegated. And then he saw that the value of his time was worth thousands of dollars. He realized that he could probably get a pretty good assistant to help him to block out things that were recurring. And then he could focus on the more complex areas. So that awareness brings such a big aha to let go and open up to new ideas.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute great point there. You really have to understand what's not working. And so many, I think it's just human nature. We don't want to look at what's not working. We want to look at what's working. And we tend to just kind of skip over it. And we don't get real with ourselves.
Totally. We don't want to get real with ourselves because we're used to doing it a certain way and we're creatures of habit.
Yeah. And I think so often, too, in this urgency zone is we've become accustomed to using this pressure as almost adrenaline to drive us forward. We started it back in school, right? We had a test. The next day, what do? Cram the night before. And we were rewarded for that behavior. We started to learn how to do it. It's like going before you go on vacation. How much do you get done on the week and the day before you go on vacation? Wow.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right?
That's because you have such focus at that time and such motivation, right? That you're just like, okay, I want to leave here with an empty desk, and you just get to it. And you say no. You say no to more things than you say yes to.
Yeah.
In that period.
And tremendous leverage. There's massive pain if you don't get it done.
Absolutely. One more thing that I want to add to that with that question of what else can you do? Usually when you want to change the way you're doing things, sometimes we only think about, because it's all the scenario that we're using gives us incremental change, some small changes. So sometimes I use an exercise with people to have them see, how would you do things if you only had a half a day to work? So, for instance, you had a health issue. So I know somebody who had a health issue and they really could only work 4 hours a day. Anything more was a problem for them. What would you do differently? How would you show up, and what would you not do if you only had 4 hours to work a day?
That's brilliant. I love that.
Because it shakes up the whole situation of the way that you need to think about things. It was funny, somebody on Facebook, I just posted this view of this gorgeous hotel in the Swiss Alps that's sort of built into the mountain that somebody had posted. I'm like, oh my God, I've been there, because I used to live in Switzerland for 16 years. And I was like, oh, I've been there. This is such a beautiful place. And somebody wrote back to me and said, how do I bring all those essentials that I need to bring with me, all my beauty products and this and that? And, it was a joke, of course, that she was making all of her essentials with her, large suitcases and everything. And I thought of this same example, that it's the situation, right? You got to carry it in on your back. So whatever it is that you do bring, you think more carefully about what really is essential and what is not. And so sometimes we have to create those scenarios for ourselves. Like you said, vacation. Well, why not pretend every week that we're going on vacation at the end of the week, and therefore we'd have more focus? We can do that in our head. We can mentally change the scenario and then think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, I almost think that in today's environment, it becomes kind of a badge of honor. I worked 100 hours this week. I worked, 90 hours this week. And the work many times gets stretched out to the amount of time that we're dedicating to it. Great strategy. Love it. Every peak performer that has ever lived or will live does one thing extremely well. They know how to take their ideas and execute on them. Ideas and knowledge are not power. But the ability to execute on them, that is real power. If you consider yourself a peak performer and really want to take your game to the next level and truly master the science of execution, I would like to send you some information about our upcoming event, Business Execution Summit. Simply take your phone and text the word BE Summit, one word, to 41411. And I'll send you some additional information on how to master the most important skill you will ever acquire for your life or your business. Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope you found today's show valuable. If you would like to receive these shows automatically to your phone or to your computer, simply go to iTunes and subscribe. After listening to several of the shows, if you're so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, as this helps us reach additional people and spread the message. If you're truly committed to taking your life to the next level and doing whatever it takes to become a peak performer, but something's holding you back, something is blocking your way, and you just can't seem to figure out what it is, send me an email to info@thorconklin.com, and I'd be more than happy to get on the phone with you. We'll schedule a 15-minute discovery call. No obligation, no cost. I absolutely love to hear from the listeners, and if there's something I can do to help, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, if you found something of great interest in today's show and you want to share that with your friends and family, simply go to my Facebook page, Thor Conklin, click on the episode, hit the share button, and share it on your page. You can follow me at Twitter at Thor Conklin. The website is thorconklin.com. We're constantly adding new free resources, discussing additional tricks, tips, tools, and strategies on how to be a peak performer. Remember, I try to keep these episodes short so you can listen to them during dot time, doing other things, commuting, driving, walking, working out. Decide to be a peak performer in all that you do. And until tomorrow, have an absolutely amazing day.
And that concludes part 1 of our interview with Penny Zenker. Be on the lookout for part 2, where she and Thor discuss the benefits of block time techniques, as well as seeing a problem for what it really is. The Peak Performers Podcast. We'll see you at the top.